The one final step before we actually assemble our model is to work on the cockpit. Everyone loves to check out the cockpit to see what goodies are inside. And in today's marketplace, you can easily spend more money dressing the cockpit than on the model itself. But the results can be such that you expect a miniature pilot could climb inside and fire that beauty up. I'll use the monogram BF109G as the basis of our cockpit detailing. Although released in the 70s by Revell, this kit still holds up today as a classic of the mold maker's art. We'll use instrument panel parts, seatbelt buckles, and rudder pedals supplied by Waldron Products. Waldron Products have been on the market since the mid-70s and stand out as some of the finest miniaturizations available, and at a reasonable price, too. We'll also use Cooper details for the cockpit tub and other aircraft parts. The latter, cast in rosin, are noted for their accuracy and quality. Once again, check your local hobby shop for these items. Clean your rosin parts in warm, soapy water. The etched metal parts require no cleaning. Check the detail kit assembly instructions to see what, if any, modifications are required to the basic model. Trim the areas as necessary, retaping and refitting as many times as you need. Next, following the directions, tape the cockpit components together and dry fit in the fuselage. You will likely have to do additional trimming. You should not have to force the fuselage halves together. If you do, the seam could split sometime in the future. You will also need to dry fit the instrument panel. Now, many aftermarket detail kits are designed for a specific model made by a specific manufacturer. But some details, such as Edward and Airwaves, are generic and intended for any model. In all cases, you need to spend the time up front adding shims or shaving plastic as necessary. Stay away from trimming metal parts. You're asking for headaches if you do. Here's one technique for creating a custom instrument panel using Waldron's 1/32 scale British aircraft instrument and bezel sets. First, transfer the outline of the kit part onto 10,000th white styrene card. Cut out your individual instruments. Transfer instrument locations to the new panel using the kit part or references. Fix each instrument in place with a bot of superglue. Overlay with a piece of oversized 5,000th clear acetate. Place the Waldron bezel on the tacky side of artist's frisket and cut each bezel out. Lightly coat the back of each bezel with a film of superglue and fix in place. Next, flow gloss black enamel on the instrument panel. The bezels will act as dams. Scribe around odd-shaped instruments to create a dam to keep the paint out. Once dry, place a dot of thinned white glue into each instrument face. Once dry, spray with flat black. Remove the white glue with a pin. Dry brush the bezel faces with dark gray to bring them out. Trim the acetate, and your instrument panel is ready for mounting. The cockpit of our BF109 is painted in Humbrol dark gray, which is a color match for the official Luftwaffe color RLM66. I am using a 3/0 Poly-S red sable brush to ensure the best possible paint flow. The Revy gun sight gets a dot of old silver and is finished with clear lacquer. Trim chains are brushed with Floquil gunmetal. Wiring details get painted flat black. Although the Waldron foot pedals look fabulous, they need to be toned down a bit so that they don't stick out like a sore thumb. I'm using Floquil gunmetal here. To protect the color coat for subsequent handling, I prefer photographic finishes which are available at photo supply stores. They are costly, but they go a long way. Their advantage over anything else is that they dry quickly, are UV protectant, and will never crack, shrink, or yellow. You can spray them over any finish, acrylic, lacquer, bare metal, or enamel. They thin with lacquer thinner. We can now highlight the cockpit parts by dry brushing. We'll use Gunzi Sangyo's dark sea gray. Load your brush lightly, paint a card till the paint barely comes out, and then you can begin dry brushing. Thinned black paint applied with 34-gauge brass wire adds color to the instrument faces. Pick out the white dials with white paint loaded onto a fine brush. Finally, add a drop of gloss varnish to simulate glass. The final step before assembly is to wash the parts with a dark color wash for added depth. But first, put on a coat of clear flat. If you don't have photo finish lacquer, Tester's dull coat will do. I'll cut some document protector to make the reflectors for the Revy gun sight. Super glue applied with a fine thin wire will hold our Revy gun sight reflectors in place. The fine rosin backing from these small parts is removed by lightly sanding on 400 grit sandpaper. Following the Cooper Details instructions, cockpit parts are assembled using super glue. Waldron seat belts are easy to install. Use slightly tacky tape, Post-its are fine, to hold the parts so they won't go airborne. Cut thin strips of masking tape because it comes close in texture and color to the real items. The Cooper detail set with the Waldron details makes a veritable showpiece in itself. Before we begin final assembly, let's talk some more about colors. When you're building World War II aircraft, you have a huge field in which to exercise your individual creativity. The downside is that that field is full of mines. You see, part of the problem is that we won the war. How could winning the war be part of the problem? Well, after the war, Axis aircraft were piled into heaps and melted into pots and pans and cheap toys, because at the time, no one was given much thought to posterity, only to getting home. Only a few were saved for technical evaluation in museums. This means you have some leeway in interpreting the colors on Axis aircraft. Now, there are some things that you must consider when building any World War II airplane. The first is the difference in paint batches. The second is the quality of the color and black and white emulsions of the time and the subsequent fading that's occurred over the years. Thirdly, official references were often contradictory. Fourth, from a field perspective, you have to understand that paint was used to control corrosion, and so any color that happened to be on hand was what got put on the aircraft. You have to also consider the effect that sun, weather, and combat damage had on paint, and then finally, sometimes the kit color references aren't always accurate. Royal Air Force World War II interiors were generally painted aircraft gray-green. I'll use a color-matched Humbrol paint to replicate the color for the Mosquito. The use of pastels is another technique for detailing interiors. You must be careful, though. The effect is very fragile, and you cannot apply a protective sealer. I like to use a contrasting color to highlight the basic paint job. Art supply stores carry pastels. Japanese interior colors are somewhat tricky to replicate. Some interiors were painted light green, while others were painted a metallic blue. I'll replicate the metallic blue by spraying a primer coat of Floquil Old Silver. Then I'll finish with Pactra Royal Blue, but I will mix only 30% blue pigment to 70% thinner. Also, and this is important, when you're normally spraying, you're usually around 30 to 35 pounds per square inch. But in order to do this technique, you need to be able to vary your pressure down to around 11 pounds per square inch. Our Monogram B-17 doesn't require as much work. Monogram and 1/32 scale Revell products have so much detail molded in, you need only paint and highlight them, as I've described earlier, to achieve convincing results. Similar treatment should be given to wheel wells, engine cowlings, and other painted areas. Our basic interior color is zinc chromate, and this was the standard for U.S. Army Air Corps aircraft during World War II. You'll find wide variations in the actual color, ranging from a greenish color all the way to a yellowish color. Generally, instruments boxes, and the like inside the aircraft were painted flat black. If you don't feel confident with your brushing skills, then mask off the surrounding areas like this. I use a scrap piece of plate glass to lay out my tape and cut it. And don't forget the small details like this navigator's clipboard. I finished it in Floqual Old Silver and Pactra Light Tan. I'll highlight the wiring bundles with a little bit of Humbrol Dark Gray. Highlight the wiring bundle hold downs with a little bit of flat black. We'll dry brush the black instrument panels with some Pactra Light Gray.